Welcome back, our dear viewers, to our special program on the passing away of former President George Bush Sr. We would like to welcome our guest, U.S. Ambassador to the State of Kuwait, His Excellency Lawrence Silverman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's good to be with you.
Mr. Ambassador, we now would like to show you a report, and after that we will go ahead. This report is going to cover the biography of former President, and we will talk a little bit about this great leader.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
On June the 12th of 1924, George H.W. Bush was the son of a wealthy Wall Street banker and future Connecticut Senator Prescott Bush and Dorothy Bush. He became the youngest naval pilot at the age of 18 following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor, and flew 58 combat missions, earning him the Distinguished Flying Cross. After returning from the Pacific, Bush attended Yale University, where he was a noted athlete, and then went west with his new wife, Barbara Pierce, to set himself up as an early Texas oil prospector. By the mid-1960s, politics was calling and Bush ran for the U.S. Senate, but lost. In 1966, however, he was on his way, winning a seat in the House of Representatives, chosen by President Richard Nixon to serve as envoy to the United Nations. Bush later served as the head of the Republican National Committee during the Watergate scandal. Then, he became one of the few prominent Westerners to get into China, which had been closed to outsiders for decades. Bush headed the U.S. Liaison Office in Beijing, the forerunner of the U.S. Embassy. In 1976, Bush became the head of the CIA. He only held the job for a year, but was so well remembered that the agency later named its headquarters in Langley, Virginia after him, and he would later say it was his favorite job. In 1980, Bush ran for the White House, challenging former California Governor Ronald Reagan for the Republican Party nomination. After a rancorous campaign, Reagan won the party's nomination and picked Bush as his running mate, handing him the vice presidential spot. He served 2 terms as Ronald Reagan's vice president before reaching the pinnacle of political power by winning the 1988 presidential election, soundly defeating Democrat Michael Dukakis. During his presidency, Bush, alongside National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft and Secretary of State James Baker, engineered a soft landing for the Cold War as the Soviet Empire shattered and Germany unified. In another foreign policy test, Bush decided in 1990 to build a diverse international coalition, including more than 400,000 U.S. troops to eject invading Iraqi forces from the state of Kuwait. After losing the White House in 1992 to Democrat Bill Clinton, Bush became a widely admired political elder. He and Clinton became close friends after working together in the wake of the Asian tsunami disaster in 2004 and after Hurricane Katrina the following year. Clinton described his working experience with Bush in 2011 as amazing, saying he literally came to love Bush, who he had always liked and respected and ran against. President Barack Obama awarded Bush the Presidential Medal of Freedom that same year. The first sitting vice president to be elected to the presidency since 1836, Bush was also only the second person in U.S. history to see his own son follow in his presidential footsteps when George W. Bush was elected President of the United States in the year of 2000. The late Bush revealed several years ago he had suffered from a form of Parkinson's disease, which left him unable to walk. He had also suffered multiple health scares later in his life. In December of 2014, he was hospitalized for what aides described as a precautionary measure after experiencing a shortness of breath, and the following July fell at his home, breaking the C2 vertebrae in his neck. Bush has died at an age of 94 in Houston and survived by his son, former President George W. Bush, and Jeb Bush, the former Florida governor and the 2016 presidential candidate, in addition to another 2 sons, Neil and Marvin, and daughter, Dorothy. Bush will be buried alongside the former First Lady at his presidential library in College Station, Texas.
Dear viewers, and we would like to welcome once again the U.S. Ambassador to the State of Kuwait, His Excellency Lawrence Silverman, to our show.
Shukran, thank you very much to be.
We're talking today on the passing away of former President George Bush Sr. Your Excellency, how do you think the upbringing of him in this in a family of a political career, how did that all affected him in his life?
I think it had an enormous impact on him, Ahmed. If you think about, we use the term Renaissance men, to people who have had many, many different experiences throughout their lives. He had obviously a high quality education. He was fortunate enough to have that in the United States. But he held so many different positions. He moved from the business world. He had a distinguished military career in World War II, but he had a political career. He had a career as a diplomat, a representative to the United Nations and to China, and then multiple positions within the executive branch of the government, and as a elected representative as well. So he had a unique opportunity, but he made the most of that opportunity.
Like you mentioned earlier, he was in World War II.
Yes.
Can you shed some light on what was his role during?
Well, I understand that he, I think, participated. He was a Navy pilot, and he participated in 58 different bombing runs during his career. Was shot down. So it was a very distinguished career. But the point I'd like to make for your audience, Ahmed, is that when he was asked about his military career, he said, "No, I'm just another one of the soldiers, or airmen. Don't single out my role. We all sacrificed during that period."
Okay. Having headed the CIA for 1 year, do you think that helped him, made him more knowledgeable on the international affairs?
Absolutely. Like I said, I think in President Bush, you had a unique combination of qualifications that you don't get even in very experienced people that we elect to the presidency. Having the diplomatic background, having the military background, having this background as director of the CIA, also being an elected representative in our Congress. So he sees both branches of the government.
Also the time of when he was in office.
Yes.
That's the time when we had the Soviet Union collapse.
Absolutely.
And also the Gulf War. And those are two main events in the U.S. history. How did he play in that?
Absolutely. I mean, he was a key figure, a seminal figure for us, particularly in the end of the Cold War. And you saw that. I think it was a very proud day, when the wall came down and he could say, basically, the Cold War is over. We're in a whole new era. And as you know, he spoke of a new order, a more peaceful order, inshallah, at the time. And that is also what drove him to have the position that he did at the time of the invasion, Saddam's invasion of Kuwait, which is, if we're going to have that new order, we cannot allow violations of that order to have this kind of aggression against the whole system. It wasn't only about Kuwait.
Yes.
It was about the whole international system.
Yes.
So for him, it was a matter of principle as well as the individual aggression.
Yeah. He was the first president having served 2 terms as a vice president.
Yes, that's right.
Under President Ronald Reagan.
Right.
How do you see that affected him, and what do you think that helped him in his career?
Yes, Ahmed. If you throughout today in the United States, the news outlets are interviewing many of the people that worked with President Bush, for him, and other leaders of our legislature. And what they all say is he understood us. He understood how we did business. And Colin Powell was on, for example, General Colin Powell, and I heard, why was the prosecution of Desert Storm, of the war, successful? Because the president, gave us, he said, Colin Powell, the military, everything that we needed. Why? Because he knew everything that we needed from his military background and all of the diplomacy in building the coalition. He understood what you needed to be successful and to prosecute a war successfully, but also to prosecute peace successfully.
Yes. Yes. How do you see him, what roles did he play in the U.S. history, and how effect did it have beside those 2 great events?
Sure. So I think the 2 roles. One is, of course, this hugely seminal event, not just in U.S. history, but in international history, with the end of the Cold War, the fall of the wall, and the remaking of that part of the world. And then standing up to the aggression that was the invasion of Kuwait, putting together a coalition, getting backing for that effort from the United Nations. Of course, he was ambassador to the, he had been our ambassador in the United Nations, building that big coalition, trying diplomacy, trying sanctions. When they did not work, then we only had one alternative, and that was to go to war, which we did. And why was the war, the ground war at least, short? Because he made sure that all the preparations were done with the air campaign for months in advance of the ground campaign, or a month. But it was also his action and his behavior as a politician, and interacting with Congress, you're meeting and working with people from the other political party, you know. And that's a very important lesson, that lesson of integrity and communication, and this is something that is most admired to him. For him, it was, how do we get things done? Not you know, just a political party, but how do we get things done? And as your video showed, that's one reason why there developed such a good relationship, a close relationship between President Bush and President Clinton.
Yes. Your Excellency, without doubt, the Bush administration played a great role in the liberation of Kuwait. How did that affect the two countries' relationship, Kuwait and the United States, after that?
Yeah. So I think, Ahmed, that we had a strong relationship before. We had a relationship for decades, 30 years really, before that, officially, for 30 years. But this brought it to a new, higher plane. For him, for President Bush, this was a matter of principle, as I say. You know, he literally said, this is the victory, liberation was the victory of the rule of law, you know. And that, of course, has been a tenet of Kuwaiti foreign policy too, you know, to the importance of international law and the rule of law internationally. So I think obviously it created a unique history between the United States and Kuwait, and not just between the two governments, but between the two peoples as well. So I think we have benefited from that. It took it from a very positive, close relationship to something that I would argue is unique throughout the world, uniquely close, and which we celebrate now, but we don't talk about, in the United States, we're not talking about what happened 27 years ago. We're proud of what we did, that's fine. I think if President Bush were here and you said thank you to him and he knew Arabic, he would say La shukr ala wajh. He saw it as a matter of principle and as a duty. But now we're focused on how do we work together positively to both our people's benefits right now.
Okay. Your Excellency, what lessons could be learned from his great leadership characteristics? On
a human level, I think it's I think the word would be integrity, to teach, to hand down integrity from generation to generation. I think that's what President George W. Bush most appreciated from his father, you know, that the love and lessons that his father had passed along to him, those were so important, and that he passed along to his successor as well. That's part of it. And then the other part of it is to how to go about foreign relations in a very, very serious way, to try to make the best effort to solve problems, and if you need to, you stand up for matters of principle. And if you need to use force, then you do use force. You try other means to avoid that. When it can't be done, then you still have to stick up for the principle of the international rule of law.
On the personal level, like we saw in the report earlier, he went skydiving at the age of 90.
Yeah, right. I wish I could do that, but
yes, yeah. So he was a very brave leader.
He was.
So how do you see that? I mean, his personal life compared with his political achievements.
You know, first of all, he was a very modest man, and I think we appreciate that in the United States. I mean, he you know, he would say, look, I did some good things, maybe I made some mistakes, but I will be judged on my record. I think it's the simplicity of the person, the respect that he showed, no matter who you were. It didn't matter what level you were at. President Bush showed great respect